Hi guys, I'm Kaitlyn, and this is the Stories of Echoes channel where I tell my stories, and I hope you enjoy every second. Amelia Hart stood before the mirror in the executive washroom, her fingers tracing the outline of the heart-shaped birthmark on her neck. For a moment, she allowed herself to wonder about its origin, a fleeting thought she quickly dismissed. Today wasn't about the past. It was about securing her future at Hartley Enterprises. With a deep breath, she adjusted her crisp white blouse, concealing the birthmark. The boardroom awaited, and with it, the most crucial presentation of her career. Amelia's heels clicked against the polished floor as she made her way down the corridor, her tablet clutched tightly to her chest like a shield. "You've got this, Amelia," Emma White whispered, falling into step beside her. Emma's unwavering support had been Amelia's anchor through the tumultuous waters of corporate politics. Amelia managed a tense smile. "Thanks, Em. Let's hope the board sees it that way, too." As they entered the boardroom, the weight of expectation settled on Amelia's shoulders. The board members, a sea of tailored suits and power ties, regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. At the head of the table sat Edward Hartley, the CEO, his piercing gaze fixed upon her. "Ms. Hart," Edward's voice cut through the quiet murmur, "I trust you're prepared to dazzle us with your proposal." "Absolutely, Mr. Hartley," Amelia replied, her tone professional and unwavering. She refused to let his usual attempts at intimidation throw her off balance. As Amelia began her presentation, she felt a surge of confidence. Months of research, countless late nights, and meticulous preparation fueled her delivery. Her voice rang clear as she outlined the innovative strategies that could propel Hartley Enterprises to the forefront of the industry. However, as she progressed, she noticed a shift in Edward Hartley's demeanor. The CEO's typical mask of stoic authority began to crack, replaced by an expression of growing unease. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, now held a hint of something Amelia couldn't quite place. Confusion? Recognition? Pushing aside her observations, Amelia pressed on. She was in her element, fielding questions from the board with poise and expertise. Yet, Edward remained uncharacteristically silent, his gaze now fixed on a point just below her face. As Amelia reached to adjust the projector, she felt a slight tug on her collar. In that moment, she realized her carefully concealed birthmark had become visible. A flicker of something, shock perhaps, passed across Edward's face before he abruptly stood. "Excuse me," he muttered, his voice unsteady. Without another word, he strode from the boardroom, leaving a wake of bewildered faces behind him. Amelia faltered for a moment, her professional facade threatening to crumble under the weight of confusion and unexpected scrutiny. She felt the eyes of every board member boring into her, searching for an explanation she couldn't provide. It was Emma who came to her rescue, deftly redirecting the attention of the room. "I believe we were discussing the potential market expansion in Southeast Asia," she interjected smoothly. "Amelia, could you elaborate on the projected growth figures?" Grateful for the lifeline, Amelia seized the opportunity to regain control of the presentation. She launched into a detailed analysis of market trends, her voice growing stronger with each passing minute. By the time she concluded, the earlier disruption seemed all but forgotten by most of the board members. As the meeting adjourned, Amelia found herself surrounded by impressed executives, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine interest in her proposals. Yet, she couldn't shake the unsettling feeling left by Edward's abrupt departure. Meanwhile, in the solitude of his office, Edward Hartley sat behind his imposing desk, his head in his hands. The image of Amelia's birthmark played on repeat in his mind, stirring memories he had long sought to bury. A photograph lay before him, extracted from the depths of a locked drawer. In it, a much younger Edward smiled at the camera, cradling a newborn with a distinctive heart-shaped mark on her neck. His daughter, the child he had walked away from all those years ago. The weight of his past decisions pressed down upon him, heavier than ever before. How could he have known that the brilliant young woman making waves in his company was the very child he had abandoned? As twilight settled over the city, casting long shadows across his office, Edward made a decision. With trembling fingers, he composed an email requesting Amelia's presence for a private meeting the following morning. Back at her desk, Amelia was riding the high of her successful presentation when the notification chimed. Her breath caught as she read the message from Edward Hartley. A private meeting with the CEO was unprecedented, especially given his strange behavior earlier. What could he want? She mused aloud, her mind racing with possibilities. Emma, overhearing, offered a reassuring smile. Maybe he's finally recognizing your talent. You knocked it out of the park today, Amelia. Amelia nodded absently, but a nagging feeling told her there was more to this meeting than professional recognition. As she gathered her things to leave, her hand unconsciously moved to her neck, fingers brushing against the birthmark that had caused such a stir. Little did she know, that simple mark was about to unravel the carefully constructed narrative of her life, bringing long-buried truths to light and forever altering the course of her future at Hartley Enterprises. Amelia's heels clicked against the polished marble floor of Hartley Enterprises' executive wing. She arrived 15 minutes early for her meeting with CEO Edward Hartley, her mind a whirlwind of questions about yesterday's presentation. The project's fate hung in the balance, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something more significant was at play. As she approached Edward's office, his assistant nodded and ushered her in. The expansive room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, felt charged with an unfamiliar tension. Edward stood by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. "Miss Hart, please sit down," he said, his voice carrying an unexpected note of vulnerability. Amelia took a seat, her posture professional but guarded. "Mr. Hartley, I hope we can discuss the board's decision on my project." Edward turned, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. He sat across from her, his fingers drumming on the polished mahogany desk. "The project, yes," he began, then paused. "But there's something else we need to address first." His gaze fixed on her neck, where her birthmark peeked above her collar. Amelia's hand instinctively rose to cover it. "Sir?" Edward took a deep breath. "That birthmark, it's identical to one my daughter had. The daughter I lost contact with over 30 years ago." The air seemed to leave the room. Amelia's mind raced, connecting dots she never knew existed. I don't understand," she managed, her professional facade cracking. "I was young, ambitious," Edward continued, his voice laden with regret. Amelia's world tilted on its axis. The man she'd been trying to impress, the one who'd seemed to hold her career in his hands, was claiming to be her father. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Edward leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "I know this is a shock, but when I saw that birthmark yesterday, everything came rushing back. I couldn't sleep last night, thinking about the possibility." Amelia found her voice, anger seeping into her tone. "My mother never spoke of you. How can I believe this?" "Call her," Edward said softly, sliding his phone across the desk. "Ask her about Edward Hartley." With trembling fingers, Amelia dialed her mother's number. Margaret answered on the second ring, her voice cheerful until Amelia spoke. "Mom, I'm sitting in Edward Hartley's office. He says he's my father. Is this true?" The silence on the other end was deafening. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice was choked with emotion. "Oh, Amelia, I never wanted you to find out like this." The confirmation hit Amelia like a physical blow. She ended the call, her mind reeling with questions about her mother's decades of secrecy. Edward watched her, his face a mix of hope and apprehension. "I know this is overwhelming," he said softly. "I'm not expecting anything from you. I needed you to know the truth." Amelia stood abruptly, needing space. She paced the length of the office, her professional demeanor crumbling with each step. "All these years," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "all the times you criticized my work, pushed me harder than anyone else. Was that because you knew?" Edward shook his head vehemently. "No, I had no idea. I pushed you because I saw your potential. You reminded me of myself at your age, driven, brilliant. I never imagined." She turned to face him, tears threatening to spill. "And now? How do we move forward from this? You're my CEO, for God's sake." Edward stood, closing the distance between them, but stopping short of reaching out. "Professionally, nothing changes. Your work stands on its own merit. The board unanimously approved your project this morning, based on yesterday's presentation." Amelia blinked in surprise, momentarily distracted from the emotional turmoil. "They did?" "Yes," Edward confirmed with a small smile. "You earned that entirely on your own." A knock at the door interrupted them. James Chen, the company's CFO and Edward's longtime friend, entered with a concerned look. "Everything all right in here?" I heard raised voices. Edward glanced at Amelia, silently asking permission. She nodded, feeling suddenly exhausted. "James," Edward said, "I'd like you to meet my daughter, Amelia." James's eyebrows shot up, but to his credit, he recovered quickly. "Well," he said, looking between them, "that explains a lot." He turned to Amelia with a warm smile. "I've always admired your work, Ms. Hart. Now I see where that talent comes from." His kind words eased some of the tension in the room. Amelia managed a small smile in return. Edward cleared his throat. "James, could you oversee the project kickoff meeting this afternoon? I think Ms. Hart and I need some time to process this." James nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Of course, take all the time you need." He gave Amelia an encouraging nod before leaving. In the silence that followed, father and daughter regarded each other uncertainly. The initial shock was wearing off, leaving a mix of curiosity and caution in its wake. "I know this changes everything," Edward said softly, "and I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But if you're willing, perhaps we could have lunch sometime. Start to get to know each other outside of these office walls." Amelia hesitated, her emotions still in turmoil. But as she looked at Edward, really looked at him for the first time, she saw echoes of herself in his features, in the way he held himself. She saw the regret in his eyes, the hope for a chance to make amends. "Lunch," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "I think I'd like that, but slowly, okay? This is a lot to process." Edward nodded, relief washing over his face. "Of course, we have time now." As Amelia left the office, her mind still spinning with revelations, she felt a strange mix of emotions. The ground beneath her feet had shifted dramatically, but for the first time in her life, she felt a piece of herself click into place, a piece she never knew was missing. The journey ahead would be complex, navigating the waters of a newfound family relationship while maintaining professional boundaries. But as she stepped into the elevator, Amelia realized that the project she'd been so focused on paled in comparison to the personal growth that lay ahead. With a deep breath, she pressed the button for her floor, ready to face whatever came next, one step at a time. If you enjoyed this heartfelt story, Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. We bring you a new story every day, and your support means the world to us. Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know what you think. See you in the next story. Stay inspired and take care.